Peace, blessings, and abundance, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sacred Birth Sessions. I am Jessica Pierre, birth doula, educator, and creator of Sacred Birth Blueprint. This space is for women who want more than surface level birth advice and who want to feel more informed, grounded, and confident, not blindsided when it comes to giving birth. So, take a deep breath, settle in, and let's get into today's session. So I feel like this is one of those conversations that doesn't get talked about enough. There's a lot of things that happen in birth that nobody really explains beforehand. And then when it happens, whatever it may be, you're expected to just kind of go with it. And as a doula, as a doula and a birth assistant, I've been in a lot of rooms and I've seen a lot of moms go through things that they didn't expect. Not because something went wrong, but just because no one prepared them for how birth can actually unfold. And even as a doula, I can give you a lot of information, but there's so many different things that can take place. I also take into consideration in my birth education not to give too much information. So let's just say you're low risk. I'm not going to tell you about induction, the whole induction process or anything like that until that's possibly brought up closer to the end of your pregnancy, because I don't need for you to think about things like that when it's unnecessary, So again, there's lots of information that we can give you, but things happen as they go. And that's, to me, in my opinion, I believe that is the importance of a doula being physically there with you or virtually available so that you can make real-time informed decisions. So one of the biggest things is time. Now, a lot of people go into labor thinking it's just going to happen a certain way. Like, okay, contractions start, I go to the hospital, and then baby comes shortly after. That's not always the case. Labor can take hours, sometimes a full day, and sometimes even longer than that, especially if it's your first baby. And again, nobody really prepares you for what that feels like mentally and physically. So I have a mom, she's a first-time mom, and I've been in communication with her for the past few days. She's been cramping, she understands what Braxton Hicks are, and her stomach's getting tight, and she's been dealing with early labor signs for the last 3 days. She even went to the hospital yesterday and got checked and monitored and things like that. She's 2 centimeters dilated, but the contractions are not as intense as they need to be and consistent. So they sent her home. So she's just been kind of relaxing, staying hydrated, and preparing herself as best as she can mentally for labor that's going to be happening hopefully within the next couple of days. So again, there's only so much that you can do in regards to time. Like for me personally, as a first-time mom, looking back now, I had a pretty quick labor. So I remember feeling my very first contraction. I remember the Braxton Hicks. Now, mind you, my son is 18, so it's been a little minute. But I remember the Braxton Hicks where my stomach was getting tight. Didn't hurt. I just was aware of what was going on. And then when I finally had my first contraction, it was like after 1 a.m. And I'm like, whoa, what was that? Like, what is that feeling? And I was actually on the phone with one of my friends who I was on the phone with her twice before when she went into labor with her children. And it's ironically, we were on the phone when I went into labor. But I remember feeling my first contraction after 1 a.m. and then I felt it again like 10 minutes later. And I'm telling her, I'm like, hey, if this happens again in about 10 minutes or so, I think I'm starting to get contractions. And I was 39 weeks exactly. So from the first contraction to me delivering my son was about 11 hours, which is actually pretty quick for a first-time mom. But again, with my current knowledge and experience now, I realize that I had an incompetent cervix. So with that, I didn't get a cerclage or anything, I think because it was a little too late for me to do that once they figured that out. But with an incompetent cervix, labor usually goes pretty quickly because your cervix is just like, okay, time to do what I'm supposed to do. Let's do it. And it's really, really quick. I've had a client who had a cerclage, got her cerclage taken out on a Thursday, immediately went into labor and had her baby very quickly, to the point where I, as her doula, missed her birth because it just happened so quickly. By the time she got to the hospital, baby was already almost here. So again, there's lots of different things that should be taken into consideration when it comes to the time frame of how long labor can last. So another thing is being told different things by different providers, and that can throw moms off as well. You might hear one thing from one nurse, you might hear something else from a doctor, and then now you're kind of stuck in the middle trying to process all of this in real time. And it's a lot to process, especially when you're hearing different things from different people on the same shift, or when shift changes, and you're like, how am I supposed to maneuver through all of this? And again, all of this it can feel very overwhelming, especially when you're not expecting to have to make those decisions like that in the moment, whatever those decisions may be. I've experienced moms who had a cervical check done, and they're like, okay, you're 6 centimeters, you're pretty, progressing pretty well, this, that, and the third. And then shift changes, and then somebody else comes in and they do a cervical check a couple hours later, and they're like, no, you're 4. Or you're 5 centimeters, you're not 6 centimeters, you went down. And then that discourages mom, because she's like, well, I thought I was a lot further, and now you're telling me I went backwards. Like, how does that work? One thing that people don't take into consideration is the size of the provider's hands. That makes a difference. There are male OBs whose hands are bigger. There are female OBs, midwives, nurses that have different hand sizes, and they assess things differently. So on top of that, if you're a little further along too, and for whatever reason your body's starting to push or whatnot before you're fully dilated, your cervix can swell and close back up a little bit as well. And again, these are things that are not being told to moms. So having a consistent provider is great to have if that's a possibility. So like for me, if I were to ever have a baby again, I would like to have a home birth or birth center birth with a midwife that I see consistently. I don't want different providers. If I can control that's in a perfect world, that is what I would like. Not only because of the rapport that I'm building, but also because y'all got the same hands. Like, my body by assessing it, so we're not going to get too many different readings in that aspect. Another thing that can cause things to shift is interventions. When interventions get brought up, that can really make the moments just shift. Because when you go into labor, you're not thinking that, a lot of the times, you're not thinking that, all right, cool, I'm going in and this doctor's going to do this and this doctor's going to do that, and this is going to rush the process. Like in a hospital setting, once you go in and you labor for a little bit, one of the first interventions that a lot of providers bring up is rupturing of your water, your membranes. A lot of the time they bring that up like, hey, you're progressing, but I feel like if we break your water, your labor is going to go by a lot quicker. That'll bring baby down, which will help to dilate your cervix more, which, that'll be, that they present it like it's the key to the issue of labor, which could honestly, it could work out, but it could also end up in a C-section. Because what they don't tell you is that once they break your water, a lot of the times, especially in a hospital setting, they give you roughly a 24-hour time frame. So if once they break your water and you don't have your baby within 24-ish hours, then they're going to want to talk to you about C-sections. And I've seen moms who are like, okay, cool, let's break the water, and then we are so programmed to want to have cervical checks done every couple hours just to see our progression and everything like that, instead of listening to our body, continuing to move, do what we need to do to bring baby down and things. And water's broken, and I've seen a mom get all the way to 9 centimeters. And then with the cervical checks and with whatever else, something that they don't always tell you unless you ask is you run the risk of getting an infection. And what that infection would look like is you as mom will get a fever and baby's heart rate will increase. And if that's the case, you will end up in a C-section. And that's, again, something that they don't tell you unless you know how to ask those questions, which I always teach all of my moms. Use the brain tool. You know, what are the benefits? And it's an acronym. What are the benefits? What are the risks? What are the different alternatives that we have? Utilize your intuition. And then ask, well, what if we don't do anything? What if we don't break the water? You know, what are all of my options? So especially when things like that, when it comes to all types of interventions, breaking up your water or introducing Pitocin to kind of help progress your contractions, all of these things, like I always tell all of my moms, ask questions. And if you don't know what questions to ask, and if you have a doula, make sure they're there, because sometimes we can ask questions that you just don't even think to ask, and you know that usually helps out with the situation. So it's not even always, again, about something being wrong. It's just that birth doesn't always follow a straight line. You know, just like you see those contractions on the monitor, you could possibly go through those things as well during labor. I have another mom who had a cerclage because she had what's called an incompetent cervix, and they removed the cerclage for her to be able to go into labor, and she wasn't dilating according to the providers. She was just there. She wasn't dilating, but she was getting contractions, and she didn't understand why. Turns out, when they removed her cerclage, whomever removed it did not also remove the scar tissue that was there, and that was holding everything together until they got to the point where they had her. She ended up getting an epidural because the contractions were intense, and she started to dilate a little bit, and she was laying on her side with the peanut ball in between her legs, and the nurse came in and they were like, oh, baby came off the monitor, let's try to find him. And they were looking for him for like 2 whole minutes and could not find baby on the monitor until they decided to change her position. And when they went to remove the peanut ball from between her legs, baby was crowning. You know, so it happened quicker than they thought, and it's all because nobody decided to check the scar tissue. So apparently her epidural was great. She didn't feel most of any of that. So again, there's so many different things that can happen in the midst of labor, and it can be very overwhelming. But now the biggest thing that I see is the emotional side of things. The moment where moms feel overwhelmed, unsure, unseen, unheard, and it may feel like things are happening way too fast, or like she doesn't fully understand what's going on. And I see that a lot. And nobody really talks about how intense that moment can feel. I had a mom who planned for, many moms who planned for vaginal births and end up with a C-section because she wasn't progressing. And they like to call it a failed induction. Like, there's a lot of terminology that what providers sometimes don't understand is a trigger and can cause birth trauma to moms easy. So this particular mom, she planned a vaginal birth and got to the point where she just wasn't progressing after hours and hours and hours. And when they told her, hey, you're probably going to have a C-section, she broke down crying. She had to be consoled. Like, her mom went over to her and was just holding on to her and kind of hugging her and things like that. And thank God in that situation, it wasn't an emergent situation. So she had time to kind of process it and get her mind prepared, you know, within maybe an hour or so to be able to go back for a C-section. But also, this is the importance of, yes, you have a birth plan, but the plan is just a plan. The birth plan is just to let you know your options, because during labor, anything can happen. So, you know, the emotional side of things not going the way that you pictured it can and does happen. And I think that's the real gap. It's not just about having the information. It's about understanding how things can actually unfold in real time so that you're not caught off guard when they do. And again, that's the importance of having not only just people around you in your room, like family and friends, it's having the positive support team in your room. You know, choose your village wisely. You don't need anybody, you know, saying, oh, just listen to the doctor, because that's not always the best option. I'm going to be completely honest. And the goal isn't to control every part of birth, because that's not realistic. But the goal is not to feel lost in it. The goal is to have as much of an understanding or understanding as you can to be able to move forward. And honestly, this is a big part of how I prepare my moms that I work with, making sure that they're not going through birth with a checklist, but with a real understanding of what they might experience and how to move through it. When you get to be emotional in any instance, a good thing to remember, and I always tell myself this, emotions equals energy in motion. Feel all the feels. Go through it, process it, but keep moving. Energy in motion. Keep moving. You can only control what you can control. Because when you understand what's possible, you move differently, you respond differently, and you feel more grounded even when things shift. So, if this episode helped you with feeling a little bit more clear or a little bit more grounded or a little bit more prepared, then I'm glad you're here. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss the next session. And if this resonated with you, please share it with somebody who you think might need it as well. I'll catch you on the next one. Later, guys.